Hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming out to the opening reception in the gallery top for the exhibition Homebody by Nathan Grimes. So I'll go ahead and introduce Nathan. So born in the Great Smoky Mountains and raised in the swamps of Florida Panhandle, Nathan Grimes is an interdisciplinary artist currently based in Holly Springs, North Carolina. His creative practice explores visual arts, poetry, music, engineering, and stuff from the dumpster. As a collector, converter, composer, and conductor, Nathan is concerned with interrelating fragments of various kinds. To this conceptual end, no medium, object, or idea is off limits. Nathan has been exhibited both nationally and internationally. He received a BFA in studio art and painting from Florida State University and an MFA in studio art / painting from the University of Urbana-Champaign. Now the artist will do the artist talk, and then we will do Q&A in here. And then after that, the artist would like to demo some of the works. So we'll follow in after the artist talk. So please help me welcome Nathan Grimes.
Thank you, Professor Jones, for that wonderful introduction. And I would like to thank all of you for being here with me tonight and sharing your space with me and all the stuff that I brought and put up on the walls in that other room. So I have a lot of notes, and I'm probably going to read a lot of this verbatim. So bear with me. So here I am. That's me. And then that's me, and that's me, and that's me. What kind of an artist am I? I've become to think of myself as like a kitchen sink kind of artist. Sort of everything in the kitchen sink, because I have a lot of interests, and then I get distracted from those interests into other interests, and it kind of forks off, and it begins to feel pretty messy. So a big part of my job is curating what comes back out of the kitchen sink. Another way of saying this is that I'm an interdisciplinary artist, which is a really handy term if you don't like choosing things and just want to try to do like a bunch of stuff. But I do have some kind of focal points in the kitchen sink that I spend more time at. Visual art, sound, words, engineering, and stuff from the dumpster. I also consider myself a maximalist painter working in the expanded field. So what is expanded painting? Well, the way I interpret expanded painting is that it considers all elements of a painting, including the stretcher, the canvas, and the surface. Whereas traditionally, we're generally focused on the surface, right? Like that sort of thinnest veneer of what's visible in the painting. But I like to think about painting as everything that supports the canvas, that supports that surface. So specifically, I think about expanded painting as anatomical mapping. A lot of my work is autobiographical and self-portraiture. So I think about paintings as bodies, and I divide it into 3 groups: surface, substrate, and support. So the surface is what's most like readily accessible, what you can see, or let's say like the paint on the painting, or skin for a body. The substrate is what lies beneath the surface, and it might impact the surface. And it's usually hidden except from the back. If you think about taking a painting off the wall, you could flip it around and see the material that it's painted on. So there's the substrate aspect. And then there's the support aspect, which are these armatures steel armatures that are painted white that connect the objects back to the exhibition space, and often fragments of objects to each other. So it contextualizes and supports the object. You could think of in terms of traditional painting, that would be like the stretcher that the canvas is wrapped around, or for a body, bones. So yeah, just think of a body kind of like peeled back, like made visible, like the visible body toy, I don't know, and kind of like projected out in a way, like laying bare in some respect. Speaking of bodies, this is when I start to read. Much of the work in Homebody is the result of reflecting on my own traumatic childhood environment. So I will be discussing trauma and the effects of trauma. To contextualize the art, I find it necessary to describe some aspects of this environment and the events that helped construct it. This is a difficult topic that can be inherently upsetting for many people. While I give just enough information to set and populate the scene, we all have varying emotional sensitivities and capacities for such content. If at any point you need to step out of the room, please do. It's important to me that you take care of yourselves first. I do not intend to trigger anyone with the work, but I completely understand if you anticipate or experience this and must leave. So please, if you feel like uncomfortable at any point, you can go and come back later, whenever you like. So my intentions are not to blame, shame, judge, upset, or hurt my parents in any way for their choices. They're good-intentioned, loving people that have lived a complicated life. My early childhood home was enriching, supportive, and loving, even though the tumult of my adolescent environment, even through the tumult. All three of my parents tried their hardest to support their children to the best of their ability, given the situation. They still love and support me in my endeavors, and I love them very much. Even so, this is a revealing and exposing, albeit brief, retelling of events. And despite a childhood of keeping secrets, this is my story to tell, and I would like to tell it. From May to July of 1994, I found myself living in a tent alongside the Poudre River near Fort Collins, Colorado. There were 7 of us, 3 adults and 4 children from 2 families, all seeking refuge at a mountain campsite. We had fled from our homes in North Carolina overnight, hurriedly packing 2 vehicles and crossing the state border, narrowly avoiding the police on our exit. A romance between my father and the wife of a well-connected and violent small-town police deputy provoked this sudden flight. The cop was angry and sought vengeance with terrifying resources at his disposal. If you've ever lived in a small town, anyway, all offending parties had to leave immediately. Both of my parents, my sister, myself, the other woman, and her 2 children, who were also the cops' kids. I jammed into the 2 cars with whatever we could grab and sped off into the darkness of night. As the cop did not give consent for his children to leave the state, they were legally kidnapped. So we were fugitives from the law, running for our lives. I was 7 years old. So the numbers become kind of a mapping. Toward the end of that summer, the cop found catharsis by gutting his own house with a chainsaw. He dropped the kidnapping charges, and we all eventually returned to North Carolina, but with different family configurations. My parents divorced, and my father joined his new family. In an unconventional move, both family groups decided to leave North Carolina for Florida, where we occupied the 2 sides of a Mexico Beach duplex. The next decade witnessed more relocations to North Carolina and then back to Florida. During this 10-year period, my stepmother and stepbrother struggled with substance abuse, suicidality, general psychiatric instability, and other disruptive, compulsive, and sometimes abusive behavior that left home feeling chaotic and unsafe. Along with this drastic shift in emotional climate, my family's evangelical Christian belief system took a frighteningly isolating and apocalyptic turn. The world of my childhood had ended in cataclysm, and I was seeking consolation and connection, but I was given Armageddon. So my childhood was a mess, and this continues to impact me as an adult. Often I feel like I'm still trying to piece myself back together in a way to try to understand what happened to me. And I think about the effects of this in two ways. There are sort of like the wounding aspects of it, and then the healing aspects. So kind of the breaking apart and then the putting back together. And I incorporate some of these traumatic effects of traumatic stress, the effects of traumatic stress, into like a visual language that's present in my work. I'd like to talk about some of those. So first I'll talk about wounding. I'd also like to mention that all like survival mechanisms or effects of traumatic stress are adaptive. So in a moment, it functions, and we respond this way to protect ourselves, protect our bodies, and protect our minds and our feelings too. And it's only when you are out of the environment that it can become like an obstacle or a problem, or you notice that like something's off. So wounding, I've broken this down in different, I like categories. I don't know. I've broken this further down into kind of 5 general kinds of side effects that I personally experienced to some degree. I'm also kind of breaking these down into those categories of expanded painting. Again, thinking about the body, the surface, or the skin, the substrate, the flesh, and the support, or the bones. So the first is dissociation or fragmentation. So fragmentation is a disconnection and lack of continuity between thoughts, memories, surroundings, actions, and identity. It can range from mild emotional detachment from the immediate surroundings to more severe disconnection from physical and emotional experiences and memory loss. Fragmentation evidenced by the surface, something called tessellation, which is like regular and irregular fragmentation of a picture plane, to where a plane is broken down into little pieces that fit together in some way, kind of like a puzzle, right? Fragmentation evidenced in the substrate. I incorporate a lot of reused architectural and construction fragments in my work. So that's the substrate that then I would put the surface on, that I'd resurface, right? Manufactured and or found substrate material fragments. and references to archaeological fragments and geological fragments. So things that are old that kind of resurface over time, right? Or that maybe we dig back into, we mine, we look for. Becoming an object. Inanimate objects have limited agency and are acted upon. They often go unseen, disappearing into the background. Inanimate objects have no feelings. They aren't human. Sometimes I experience this objecthood. Sometimes it feels safer to be an object than a person. Diffracting light, fragmenting and reflecting projected image. Another way that the substrate or the material breaks something down, fragments it, kind of dissociates it. And then I'll take this image, reflect it over itself, and it creates this biomorphic, sort of organic human form. If you look at a lot of the works, there's this dividing line down the center, and that's a reference to the material as a human body. Fragmentation is evidenced in the support. So again, the support is the structure that connects the pieces together and back to the wall, connects fragments together into the gallery space. It also holds fragments at a distance from each other and from the stable surfaces of the floor and the wall. So there's this idea that it's helping by keeping them in their specific position, but in keeping them in their specific position is also, it keeps them from changing. So there's this kind of dual nature of the support that holds something to cradle it, but it also holds it, like keeping it confined. You'll see a lot of this and a lot of the work and a lot of the things that I talk about, this ambivalence, this kind of like stuck feeling or complicated feeling, like having two conflicting emotions. So the support also implies a doubling of coexisting bodies, my adult self and my 7-year-old child self. The 7-year-old inner child embodies repressed emotion, while the adult embodies an intellect split from feeling. And that's my attempt at PowerPoint art. It was hard, so I just did one stick figure and then I copy and pasted it and scaled. Felt proud of myself. Anxiety and bodily tension. So anxiety is an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure, which I'm not experiencing right now because I took a beta blocker. Highly recommend it. Okay. People with anxiety disorders usually have recurring intrusive thoughts or concerns. They may avoid certain situations out of worry, and they may also have physical symptoms such as sweating, trembling, dizziness, or a rapid heartbeat. Anxiety isn't the same as fear, but they're often used interchangeably. Anxiety is considered like a future-oriented, long-acting response, broadly focused on a diffuse threat, whereas fear is an appropriate, present-oriented, and short-lived response to a clearly identifiable and specific threat. TLDR, essentially, like if you're out in the woods and you see a bear, you experience fear, so you run. But if you're at home and like, you know, your door's locked, you live in a city, no bears anywhere, but all of this, well, not all of a sudden, you're constantly afraid a bear is going to come in through your door. That's anxiety. Specifically a bear, though. I don't want bears. So anxiety and bodily tension is evidenced by the surface. Closely placed alternating complementary colors create optical vibrations that can cause dizziness or retinal fatigue in the viewer. I mean, they can also be very pretty to an extent. I know it's kind of fun, like some of these pieces that have these closely placed colors, at a distance, you can like handle it because honestly, they sort of blend together or equalize into like a desaturated gray of some sort. But the closer you get, the more violently they vibrate. And this is a way of thinking about difficult emotions. If you have experienced a lot of that, you can put it out of your mind to an extent. You can kind of compartmentalize and not think about it, but once you begin to focus on it, it becomes more distressing. Anxiety and bodily tensions as evidence in the surface again. So wearing back into a painted surface implies worrying, an anxious, self-soothing activity. Worry objects like rocks or coins develop a smooth or polished surface over time. And most of the things that I make have this very heavily built up and then worried back into and then polished surface. Anxiety and bodily tension is evidenced in the substrate. So wrapping or binding with Mason's line puts tension on a fragment. And then the support. Bodily tension is most evident in the support structures and sounds that emanate from substrate strung with steel music wire. These wires put so much tension on the resonant bodies that they deform over time. Musical instruments are at their loudest and clearest when strings are tightly wound, high strung, and near breaking. It's true. They're usually built to withstand those forces. My paintings are not. I could build them like that, but I kind of like when it changes. There's something about that that feels very, very human, very bodily. Might need a backup water. I'm good. Intense conflicting emotions, ambivalence, overload, and dysregulation. Emotional ambivalence is the simultaneous experience of positive and negative emotions about something. It's what we think of as being torn. And I found that in Harvard Business Review, which I thought was fascinating. They're talking about like neuroscience. And I'm like, oh yes, I can cite that. Emotional overload often comes from having conflicting feelings, too many feelings happening at once, or not being able to act based on your gut feelings because of the bear. It's always outside your door, even though you live in a city. You're nowhere near where bears should be. Emotional dysregulation is a term used to describe an emotional response that is poorly regulated and does not fall within the traditionally accepted range of emotional reaction. It may also be referred to as marked fluctuation of mood and mood swings. So you could think of a temper tantrum, which when I was a kid, I was notorious for. And I've learned to manage them a little bit better as an adult. Very bad to have a temper tantrum as an adult. Not too many of those anymore. Yeah. Intense conflicting emotions as evidenced in the surface. Revealed when worn into the layers of the surface, alternating black and white paint creates visual confusion. Black and white represents struggling with contradictory feelings, thoughts, and realities. In alcoholic families, reality is often contingent upon mood. Rules are unclear until they are broken, and punishment can be just as unexpected. Bright colors, excuse me, Bright colors signify intense emotion, desire to be seen, visibility, and caution. And they're fun, right? I don't know. I love bright colors. They're fun, but also in nature, they're often used as a warning sign of like toxicity or poison or stuff like that. Toxic poison, but fun. All right. Intense conflicting emotions as evidenced in the substrate. The recycled waste material of the substrate contrasts greatly with its painted surface. The substrate bears the marks of its history. It is weathered, aged, and worn out to some degree. The surface is embellished, new, and polished. And here we have a picture of a plank that's been resurfaced that's sitting back on the pile of trash that I took it from that was outside of my studio. It's very influential to have big piles of trash outside of my studio. In places, the substrate is fugitive, crumbling, and decaying. The surface might stabilize it for a little while. It saves face and keeps the substrate from falling apart. The surface also works to obscure the junk nature of the substrate. And that's my junk chunk. I no longer have it, sadly. Feelings of low self-worth and shame. Self-esteem describes how you think and feel about yourself, which changes based on mood, circumstance, performance, or the approval of others. Self-worth is a more global and stable form of self-esteem that comes from knowing and believing in your worth as a person. So kind of the difference between weather and climate. Shame is an unpleasant, self-conscious emotion often associated with negative self-evaluation, motivation to quit, and feelings of pain, exposure, distrust, powerlessness, and worthlessness. And here we have probably the largest, brightest painted surfboard of 2 pieces of wood that I found in that pile in the gallery. And it's leaned up against these 2 spikes. So you can see that little secret when you look behind it. There are a lot of secrets back behind these pieces that are like kind of levitating, right? They're not really secrets either. You just have to like move to the side a little bit. So I've had this like obsession for the past 3 years of taking video footage of empty like chip bags. And I have a couple hours of it. I think it's just going to be like a movie, just long form. I spend about 30-ish seconds or until I notice somebody is watching me do this, just taking a video of the chip bag, spending a little bit of time, and I don't pick it up. You know, I don't want to intervene, so I just leave the trash where I found it. But I collect the video, and then I found this app to anamorph myself into the chip bag. But because I'm not morphing into an animal, I'm morphing into this sort of empty, disposable, kind of flaccid container, which is an object, an inanimate object. I call it an inanimorph. So that's the term I use for becoming an object. It makes it a little more fun. So low self-worth and shame is evidenced by the substrate. Using discarded or waste material as a substrate is metaphorical for how I fundamentally experience some aspects of myself. I don't want these feelings, and I intellectually grasp that I'm not an empty bag of Doritos Tangy Ranch, because I don't think I am. But my thinking and feeling parts of self are not yet fully integrated. So there's this split that doesn't allow this cognitive or intellectual understanding of that I'm not trash filter over into the emotional kind of 7-year-old aspect of myself. Investing labor, time, and money on resourcing waste material is what I've learned to do to make the rejected thing palatable, if not aesthetically pleasing. Low self-worth and shame is evidenced in the support. And this book says adult children of alcoholics judge themselves without mercy, which in my experience is true. Unfortunate, but it is true. The white supports imply a fear of being seen and a desire to disappear. At the same time, they thrust the substrate out into the spotlight, there to be judged, appreciated, dismissed, or humiliated. Can the context of something as art in a gallery space redeem it from its material reality and fraught motive origins? So one thing these supports do is they try to blend in with the wall, but of course it has to be a white wall. So it's a very specific space that it wants to belong to in order to, I guess, validate itself. I don't know, validate myself? Not sure. Loneliness and depression. Loneliness is the state of distress or discomfort that results when one perceives a gap between one's desires for social connection and the actual experiences of it. Even some people who are surrounded by others throughout the day or in a long-lasting marriage still experience a deep and pervasive loneliness. Symptoms of depression include issues with sleep, low energy, low self-esteem, poor concentration, difficulty making decisions, feelings of hopelessness. Loneliness and depression is evidenced in the surface. Songwriting is an important self-soothing tactic for me. It began in middle school amidst chaos at home and bullying at school. The recordings are populated with layered stringed instruments and lush vocals, but I make them by myself, and their lyrics point to loneliness. You can have many close friends and still feel lonely. You can have a great adult life and still be haunted by the ghosts of childhood past. Conflicting things can coexist, conflicting realities. Loneliness and depression is evidenced in the surface and substrate. So something I like to call a nostalgia pit, which happens to me every once in a while. Early to mid 1990s childhood nostalgia has a big influence on the colors and shapes present in my work. While the formal elements of this Nickelodeon period are saturated and playful, they're personally, emotionally complicated. Originally, nostalgia was a medical disorder and a form of melancholy. Etymologically, it comes from the Greek nostos, homecoming, and algos, sorrow. But now it's just fun, which is better. I think that's a better framing. But it can be complicated. All right. Well, now that we got through that part, I'm going to talk about some healing aspects from these effects. And you notice here is the support of that other piece. All its hands covered in Velcro. Pieces eventually fell off of. Don't use Velcro. Don't use Velcro if you're going to store it in a hot warehouse. From abstraction to representation. Abstraction has been used by many artists over a long period of time to evoke or describe traumatic events. As it cannot be understood in the moment, trauma is processed after the fact. This processing allows the event to take the form of a coherent narrative. The stories we tell ourselves about our lived experiences shape our identities. Representations of these ways of being may help other people with similar experiences to feel understood. Personally, I find comfort in relating and being related to. So here we have this sort of me becoming an object becoming my inner child. So this process of abstracting and representing. You come in. Come on in. Order from chaos. There's a lot of text on this slide. I like text. I like words a lot of words. I don't know. Another way to cohere the abstraction of traumatic experience is through adopting meaningful systems. Many people rely upon religion as a structuring system. As my relationship with religion is fraught, I make things instead. So it becomes a bit of a surrogate for a spiritual practice. I use personally significant numerical systems to aid me in my artistic production. If you measure or count elements and aspects of my work, the system becomes evident. Repetition makes reality regardless of what is real. Our feelings are more influential than our thoughts, which is true. As much as we'd like to deny it, it is very true, and that's why advertising works. You know, you don't need that massive truck, but you're being sold something that isn't a truck. Maybe nobody wants a truck in here. I don't know. I kind of want a truck. I should watch less advertising. So here's some of the numbers that I incorporate. 7's a big one. 17 for the decade. 34, which was the age at reflection when I did a lot of this. So a lot of the pieces in this work. So these numbers come up again and again. There are also a lot of like Judeo-Christian numbers present here as just kind of residue from like latent Christianity. And I don't know, I like numbers. And if there's a number that pops up, honestly, that I didn't expect, I'll find a meaning for it. So there's always that aspect to a system that kind of grows and changes as you see fit. Taking stock. To take stock is to carefully think about something to help decide about what to do next. My works function like landmarks on a map of affect. As I continue to expand this map with stockpiles of objects, perhaps I'll become better acquainted with the terrain. If I understand the terrain, I might gain the ability to navigate it safely. Or I'll just be stumbling over all of these objects that I've made that I don't have space for. But we'll take the positive eventuality, and I could use it as a map, figure out what to do next. Who knows? Reconnecting and revaluing. An important part of healing is reconnecting to repressed or abandoned parts of self. In part, for me, this takes the form of making space for my inner child. I build secure vessels to cradle his representations. I indulge his curiosity and sense of wonder. I am learning to console him instead of confine him. And there's a secret in there. When you go into the space, if you want to, you could try to find it. Revaluing complicated fragments of experience can transform self-worth. It may take a long time to recognize, but some hardships build resilience, and some adversity inspires beauty. I believe in alchemy. Sea glass is an alchemical material. Sharp edges wear soft as fragments tumble in the surf. Trash becomes treasure. Feelings are alchemical as well. Vulnerabilities become strength, from lead to gold. Making, sharing, and conversing. I've been making things for as long as I can recall. First out of curiosity, pleasure, and at the encouragement of my parents. Later, it became a coping mechanism. Now I recognize the complex nature of my creative impulse. Sharing such personal origins of artwork is a risk, but I feel compelled to do so. The story behind this content is meaningful to me, and it might be meaningful to somebody else at some point. Everyone experiences emotional wounding throughout life. How do we acknowledge our resilience and honor the fragments of our former selves. And then some books about this topic that I found helpful if you're interested in reading. And that is my presentation.
Scott, how long does it take you to read one of your pieces?
A long time. A long time. From like pretty long to very long. The piece that is here, I've been working on it I started it honestly last year, but I've been working on it consistently for most of this year. So it's taken me the better part of 9 months to make this. And it's because it's complicated. I make it fun thing about being an artist is that if you don't have like enough problems in your life, you can just make your own problems. And then when you solve them, though, you feel real good. You're like, oh, I got some control. I solved these problems. Awesome. So I made myself a big old problem. And, and then I spent the next most of a year using my studio time to try to solve it. And it worked out pretty well. So these are 68 fragments, which is 34 times 2. My math isn't very complicated. And they each have, I don't know how many processes are done to them, but like, well, a long time. I could talk about the process if you're interested. Okay. So start out with this material that I found. Actually, somebody else took it out of a dumpster and I inherited it from them. So it has all these dents, indentations, this material history in the front of it. And I wanted to preserve that in some way or like telegraph it through the surface. So I figured out what shape I could make with the rest of this foam. And I chose this like pentagonal shape. And if you count, most of these are pentagons. So it's all about pentagons. I love pentagons, my favorite shape. It references a human body, sort of 5 points of touching the world. It represents, think of like standard Western construction facade of a house. So represents the body and the home. So I broke it down, figured out how to break it down, cut it down, and then each one has a word. So I had this chart of 34 words. So 34, 68. I guess it had to be 68. Yeah. 34 words. Monosyllabic, loosely synonymous words, verbs for unite and divide. So you have unite on the left and divide on the right. So, and some of them overlap. Some of the words are contronyms or autoantonyms, meaning the one word has 2 opposing meanings. So like clip, you can clip something together, but then you can like clip your fingernail, you can clip it off. So I covered each one of these in words, like a transparent gel that hardens. And then I paint them 10 times, alternating between black and white, using a different tool to paint it so that the noise that builds up on the surface is different. So there are four different groups of these chunks. And then I sand back into it. And that takes a long time, longer than I would like to spend. A lot of the processes just become painful. And then I like regret my decision. I sand it down and then clear coat it and then wrap it in mason's line, which is a material used in construction, one for visibility, but also to keep something level, to keep it sort of in line and make sure that it's right? So your foundation is level, your block wall is level. It's not going to fall over on you, like some houses do. And then, then I had to make all the brackets, which was a completely different endeavor. But It's a long time, yeah.
There's a piece in there, that's on the ground, that almost looks like an instrument, you have a picture of it up there. And you have two pieces of paper that look like song lyrics, I don't know if that's a glance at it, but tell me what's behind that too.
You're right about both of those. That's an instrument, and that is a song, and the song is playing on a speaker behind it. So those are the lyrics playing on the song, and I made the instrument. So like homemade instrument. A lot of it, this work ends up being about having something to try to have a little bit of control over. So if you like make your own instrument that you then make your own song on and make your own recording, I don't know, there's something strange about that, but satisfying. And the song is about essentially it's about all these like defenses, like emotional defenses or coping mechanisms put in place to keep yourself together, but then after time it becomes an obstacle to like experiencing life. So you have to be like, all right, well, let's move on to the next thing. Yes.
I've got two questions.
Okay.
The first one is, do you like Doritos?
I do like Doritos. Yeah. I don't eat a lot of them anymore. Can't really eat simple carbs too much. A lot of inflammation. Body doesn't like it. But Doritos, yeah, who doesn't? Okay.
The second one is like, would you say that any of these is your favorite?
Oh, I think it's the instrument that you mentioned in the case, because I play it all the time and I can use it. I love the idea of having like a piece of art that is a tool that you can use to make more art. That's like life, right? Like it keeps creating something. So I think that's my favorite piece. Yes.
I just want to go back to the Doritos for a second.
Yes, more Doritos.
When you flipped over the side and it was about shame and showed that piece of art, I thought, wow, that is the perfect symbol of shame, right? And that and Tim's. And then you went in a totally different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And like an eating disorder, just any person, anybody in this room who's ever eaten a whole bag of chips by themselves and thought, okay, I'm really ashamed of myself. But was that any part of that recreation?
It was not, but that is something that I would do, but I would binge on cookies. Like I would eat which is why I can't have them anymore. Have my capacity. I'm like 90% cookies now. So there's no more room. I eat one and it just comes back out. Yeah, I would see like a pound of those. Just like a whole container. Because I liked it. I didn't feel good afterward. There's something about having that little bit of pleasure, right? And then wanting to hold on to it and repeating it to a point to where it actually becomes kind of a problem. But so thank you for bringing that up, though. I hadn't thought about that.
And so I was actually glad you guys were all in here because I got to be in space by myself. And I actually touched one of the ones that
The crank one?
The crank one, yeah.
The crank.
And then I came in and saw that you're working through some issues related to childhood trauma, growing up in a traumatic environment. And while I certainly wouldn't try to draw a moral equivalence between growing up around substance abuse and growing up in the type of environment where I grew up, a very strict evangelical household, there's some similarity, I think, between constantly being on edge and not being certain about whether you can do things or not.
Yeah.
As I was like looking around to see if anybody was watching before I touched it, I just found out like that reaction in this context now to be kind of interesting, and I'm wondering if that's like a theme or something you think about at all.
Yeah.
Like having things that can clearly be touched and used, but like not having them clearly labeled at all, but yeah, you should pick the stick up and rub it across the thing.
That is definitely part of it.
I missed that early pause.
Yeah, just about the, you were talking about like rules and trying to figure out what they are because they can be so complicated. And I talked,
Can be met with wrath.
yeah, and I talked about it a little on a slide earlier. I was talking about like in an alcoholic household, there was this sort of undermining of rules, but also I grew up in like an evangelical household too. So I totally understand where you're coming from. Thank you for making that observation. Appreciate that.
Yeah, versus coming to artist talk, the artist would like to go back into the gallery space and to work with some of the interactive pieces and demo them. The rest of you guys, we can enjoy the rest of the reception. Please enjoy the food and the rest of the gallery show and the artist demoing. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all.